And now they're sitting in their little cabin on the beach awaiting their trip home. And the door's open. It's a nice day. And hey, there's a bear coming. He's walking down the beach. And this bear sees them and decides it's time to charge. And he comes charging right toward the cabin. And they kind of, what the heck's that crazy bear doing? He's coming up here. This is a charge. He's coming in the door. And he empties his gun on this dang bear.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 386 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Ron Spomer is back on the show with me again today, and we talk about some of his hunts that he has done over the years for brown and grizzly bear. In particular, Ron had the somewhat unique opportunity to hunt Kamchatka brown bear in far eastern Russia back in the early 2000s. In this episode, we talk about what a wild adventure that trip was. Plus, we also cover some of his other hunts for brown and grizzly bear he has done in Alaska, to include a hunt he did this year in the spring of 2025. As usual, we also talk a lot about rifles, cartridges, and bullets, as well as just other stuff that goes along with hunting big bears like that. And as always, it is great having Ron on the show. But before we get started talking to him, make sure you are signed up for my email list by going to biggamehuntingpodcast.com/ebook. Sign up there. You will get my free ebook when you do so on the best hunting cartridges. You'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday about hunting, shooting, ballistics, hunting stories, stuff like that. If you like the Big Game Hunting Podcast, you will love those emails. Okay, now let's get started talking about bear hunting with Ron Spomer. Ron, it is a pleasure having you back on the show again today. I've had you on a bunch of times in the past to talk about sheep and moose and this and that. But today we're talking about hunting the big bears, because you have more experience hunting the big bears than anybody else that I know.
Well, I haven't hunted all that many, but I've been on a few hunts. Some of them have been failures, if you mean getting a bear, but I've gotten a few as well.
Now, brown/grizzly bear, and there is a difference. We'll talk more about that later, but they have a reputation of one of North America's most dangerous species of game. But while they do indeed live in North America and some parts of the continental U.S., Canada, Alaska, they're also hunted in Asia and Europe as well. And you have done some hunting for these bears in a couple different places, right?
Yeah, I sure have. And it's a good point. The brown bear, that grizzly family, it really does come from Europe, spreading across Asia. I suspect over the Bering Sea land bridge back when, down through Alaska and clear down into, grizzly bears into Mexico. So it's a big family, but they do make some distinction between the ones that are coastal brown bears, we call them up in Alaska, like the Kodiak brown bear. But the interior bears are a little more, probably a lot more aggressive. And that is probably because of their environment and their food sources. They have a hard time making a living in the interior. Limited resources. They just don't have the superabundance of fish protein that the brown bears along the coast get. So because of that, Boone and Crockett has set some limits on sizes for things. And your brown bear is, I forget how many miles inland. There's a salmon stream that runs up, and they just get it all mapped out in Alaska and on down the coast, so that you know you're getting a bear that has had the opportunity to feed on the salmon. Then it's a brown bear, but the ones in the interior generally don't. So they're eating more berries and digging up ground squirrels and getting, well, they're really pretty effective predators on moose, especially the moose calves, to a little bit lesser degree caribou, but they're more of an aggressive bear that's got to do some work to get its meat. So they're could be pretty nasty and pretty vicious. As anyone who's hung around Yellowstone has seen some of the bear attacks around there, those are grizzly bears. Those are dangerous.
Now, the scientific name for this bear is Ursus arctos. That's the brown bear, and that is a combination of the Greek and Latin words for bear. So it's literally the bear. And the grizzly bear is Ursus arctos horribilis. So it's the horrible bear. Now, you have hunted horrible bear and bear yourself. Tell us a little bit about that brown bear hunt you did in Asia.
Ooh, that one requires more than a little bit of talking, because that was one wild adventure. That, of course, is the famous Kamchatka Peninsula on the eastern edge of Siberia, across from Alaska, north of Japan.
Okay.
There's this long piece of the Asia hanging down, leading toward Japan, and then the series of islands on that Pacific Rim of Fire,
Mm-hmm.
which of course extends up into Alaska and on the Aleutian Islands and up into Alaska. So similar things with the bears all along there. Well, when the Soviet Union broke up and turned into Russia back around 1990, some enterprising hunters looked into what's over there. And we knew there were some big brown bears, but no one was able to go there, especially because they had this submarine base at Petropavlovsk on Kamchatka, and that was verboten for just about anybody and everybody. So it was a real secret place. Well, when that all opened and hunters were able to go in, some enterprising Russians as well as some American outfitter types got together and said, let's start a bear camp. And it was Denny Goering who really got it going. He was writing for Field Stream magazine. He was out of Michigan, he's out of Michigan. And Denny did a great job of getting hunters booked to go over there and led many, many trips. And people were getting huge brown bears. So it became a thing. And I was fortunate enough because of my position as a writer for the hunting magazines and such that I got invited over there to sample a rifle and ammo and all that good stuff that we lucky writers get to do from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
So I went over there. My host was Linda Powell of Remington at that time. She was doing PR work for them. And they had just picked up Dakota Arms and saved that wonderful rifle maker from going bankrupt, I believe. And took it on, and they wanted to showcase their rifles. And of course, they're making a controlled round feed Model 76, real similar to a kind of a hybrid Winchester Model 70 and the Mauser 98.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite actions anyway. And I knew the Dakota people in the past, I'd hunted with them, and I knew those rifles pretty well. And of course, jumped on the opportunity to get one on a beautiful piece of walnut. And it was actually, if I remember, it was actually a Model 97, which is a little less expensive offering because it does not have the flat-bottomed receiver. It's got a round-bottomed receiver like the Remington 700, so it's a little inexpensive, less expensive to make.
Mm-hmm.
I got that one chambered for the classic 375 H&H.
Mm-hmm.
And then Remington was loading up the A-frame Swift bullets in 375 H&H at the time, so perfect for a big brown bear. My gosh. It's kind of a classic all the way. Mm-hmm. So I got all those tools in hand, put a big Swarovski scope on it, and off we went. And it was the travel from hell, shall we say, to get over there. For a time, they had it possible to go from Anchorage to Petropavlovsk, which is just a skip and a jump. Mm-hmm. But something got in them, mixed it up, and they couldn't do that anymore. So I had to fly from Idaho to New York to Paris to Moscow and all the way across Russia, like 8 time zones to cross that thing, to land in Petropavlovsk, and then get on a bus and drive up some rutted trails that couldn't possibly be called roads. Mm-hmm. And we had literally overnight in a little lodge along the way, which was just sleeping on a piece of plywood with a thin blanket and eating some borscht soup. That was their idea of a hotel.
Uh-huh.
So the adventure continues. Great partners, though. We had a great group with us, and the Russians themselves were really a lot of fun. Limited in our ability to speak languages, but we crossed that barrier pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Well, then we finally stopped at the end of the road. It was a nice frozen river starting to melt a little bit, and you couldn't really drive across it anymore, so they had to call a helicopter in to pick us up. Flew the helicopter, probably went an hour and a half north into the center of the island, then landed that helicopter in the snow so deep that the helicopter sank right to its belly.
Jeez.
And then our outfitters came out with snowmobiles to pick us up. And then we transitioned into snow shoes so we didn't sink in the snow to walk over to the cabin. And then we had to literally step down. They had cut steps through the snow down to ground level where the cabin sat. Otherwise, the cabin was pretty much buried under the snow. You could see a little bit of the roof sticking up. And that was the cook shack, an old trapper's cabin. And then they had some tents above ground in which we slept. So it was just a real primitive, wild scene. And then we did some fishing on a river and caught a bunch of char and, of course, went bear hunting. Mm-hmm. And that is snowmobiling at that time of year. You ride around in snowmobiles, you glass the hillsides, you find a dark spot, and sure enough, there's a bear just coming out of its den. And then you lay an approach.
Mm-hmm.
So we started stalking these bears, and I was shocked at how alert they were. My goodness, we had to really be out of sight completely, as well as, of course, working the wind. But if they saw us coming from even as much as looked like about a quarter of a mile away, I thought they might go back in their dens being kind of sleepy, just having woke up. Pooh, they took off.
Oh, man.
They were gone. But fortunately, we were able to find them wandering around. They were already appeared to be looking for females. Mm-hmm. They get out of hibernation and immediately kind of look in, well, whose turn is it to have some puppies? So the big boars are out just crisscrossing the country looking for females. So you get onto some tracks and follow them, or else just happen to catch one going past. And that's what happened with us. And we kind of crossed at a right angle. And I rolled off of this snowmobile sled that I was on. It was kind of a miserable way to hunt. They put the hunter in a sled, pulled behind a snowmobile that was probably manufactured in 1960 and is held together with baling wire and glue. Some of our team had, like Linda one time, she was out with hers and it broke down, and they literally spread out a canvas and took apart and rebuilt the carburetor to get that thing going again. I knew how to maintain those machines, but I mean, they were really primitive. But the upshot was we were able to get around on that snow and get our bears. And then that one we crossed, I just rolled out, and he kept the snowmobile going, sort of a smart move to distract the bear while I rolled up, got my rifle loaded, got in position. And by then that big brown bear was trotting, loping through the snow. Mm-hmm. And I was remembering that shot was probably only about 80 to 100 yards, pretty close shot. So I just swung with the bear. It was pretty obvious from his body language he wasn't stopping. So I just swung through him and risked a running shot, make it a loping shot. Yeah. Just had it in front of his shoulders a little bit and put it right through the shoulders, and down he went. Actually hit a little bit high, which was a good thing, because on a bear, a high shoulder shot is pretty much lights out. But apparently I stunned him enough to knock him down, but didn't sever his spine, so he wasn't immediately dead. So when he was lying on his side there, I just put one between his shoulders right up into the heart from underneath, and that finished him off quickly. So 2 quick shots with a 300 grain Swift A-frame. And that was the story on that big bear.
That'll do it. So I'm guessing from what you're talking about, this was a spring hunt, like in June or something like that?
Yeah, it wasn't that late. It was more like mid-May to late May.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so, it's been snowing all winter long. How cold was it still at this point?
Unfortunately, it was not cold enough. It had actually started to melt. Mm-hmm. So the first day we were getting snowed on, it was sort of like a Christmas scene. We were in a birch woods, so you've got the white trunks and branches, and it's white snow everywhere, and it was like Dr. Zhivago scene or something.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive stuff, and a nice little stream rolling by. But my gosh, to get to that stream, you'd put on the snowshoes and still have to really fight to not sink into some of this snow. It was 10 feet deep.
Oh, my God.
So Jeez. Our tents were literally up in the canopy of that birch forest, not down on the ground.
Jeez, that's just a level of snow and whatnot that I've never dealt with. I think most people have never dealt with that. Only people like in Canada, Russia, or Alaska, maybe.
Yeah, I've never been in snow that deep. I've been in some pretty significant snowstorms and whatnot, but 3 to 4 feet deep snow, maybe a 6-footer here and there in the mountains. But hunting in it and having to travel in it, if not for the snowmobile, yeah, we walked. Gordy Cron and I took off walking, trying to call some red fox one afternoon. He'd gotten his bear, I'd gotten mine. And we had a couple snowshoes on, went walking. And yeah, it's a lot of work running those snowshoes, but you're in shape, you can handle it. Mm-hmm. So we headed off into the woods, and we'd stop and call every once in a while, hoping we could get red fox to come in because we were seeing their tracks. Well, we didn't call a red fox, but we called a brown bear.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. Called a brown bear, and he saw us and decided discretion was the better part of valor, and he wasn't more interested in it. He walked off. He was probably 150 to 200 yards away is all. It wasn't like it was a charge or anything. Mm-hmm. We just brought him close enough out of curiosity to check it out, and once he saw us, by then we'd kind of given up on the foxes and stood up. So he saw us and just wandered off like, yeah, well, I'm not going to mess with those guys. But it might have been nip and tuck if we had stayed put.
So how big was this bear you ended up taking in Russia?
Mine was 8 feet 3 inches, and Gordy's was 8'6", and I don't remember Linda's and Dean's. Don't remember the size of theirs. But back then you were looking for those huge 9 to 10 foot bears. That was the big deal. But I wasn't so concerned with getting a monster as just having this experience, because my job as an invited customer of Remington, really a guest of Dakota Rifles, was to showcase their rifle and the ammunition from Remington. So I just needed to get a bear. And when you're in that position, you don't want to hold out until the last minute and then end up not getting one. What are you going to write about? How are you going to showcase their products?
Yeah.
I think it worked out pretty well. And my goodness, an 8-foot bear is a pretty darn big bear.
Is this so 8 foot measured nose to tail?
Yeah, the official measurement is squared, and you spread them out and you do that toe tip to toe tip and then nose to tail and figure all the math up, and you get the square of the bear. If you just go nose to tail, people tend to stretch that hide out a little bit to add some inches. That's kind of the classic. So if you go with the square, then you can't stretch them in both directions simultaneously, so you get a more accurate reading. And 8 foot 3 inches is what we came up with.
And how does this bear compare size-wise or weight-wise to a bear of a similar age at that same time of year in Alaska that a lot of guys are taking?
Oh, from what I've seen, they're pretty similar, except for Kodiak. I think those Kodiak bears are still the biggest of the brown bears. They've always had that reputation, and I think in the record books, when you look, you're going to see the head size. And then in the few cases where they actually were able to weigh one, you've got your maximum weights pushing up around, 1,400 pounds, crazy stuff. There are tales of 13-foot bear, but I think 11 is more like the actual squared, accurate measurement. These days, if you hear someone taking a 10-foot bear, that is a real monster.
Yeah. I mean, really, geez. And so, was there anything to the reputation you think that Kamchatka had for having abnormally large bears, or was it just part of the allure of going there with the adventure and the fact that it was a forbidden place to go for so long?
Exactly right. You bet, man. I mean, if someone said, hey, how would you like to take a trip to hunt bear north of Petropavlovsk, the submarine base for the Russian fleet and all that secretive stuff there? They had an air base there with all their latest. I mean, that was the enemy back in the Cold War we feared. And here we were going to be with rifles in their territory.
Yeah. And like you said, the whole trip getting there is such an adventure too. You ended up having to go almost completely around the world.
Exactly.
3/4 of the way around the world just to get there.
Yeah, I was practically home.
Yeah. Like I was telling you before we started recording, this was a hunt my dad looked into probably around the same time that you were doing. And between the cost of it and just the insane logistics of getting there, how long it took, having to fly, you fly into Moscow and then you take another airline or two
Yep.
across the country and then ended with a helicopter flight like that. That's fun and it's adventuresome, but it's a little bit too much for some people.
Yeah, it's a real adventure. And the downside for me was I came down with kidney stones while I was in camp.
Oh my
The
gosh.
second or third day, I started feeling this pain, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And I just kind of suffered through it until we could get home. But I can remember when we left camp, we had the same helicopter deal, and it dropped us off, and we were able to take a ferry across the river. By then, it had opened up. Then got on this long bus ride, and I was so sick that there was hardly anybody on the bus but us hunters and a couple of locals. So I rolled out my sleeping pad that I brought along in the middle of the bus between the seats and lay down while I was suffering. And during that nocturnal drive, about 2 a.m, there was a big crash, and some drunk had come along the road and sideswiped the bus.
Jeez. Oh my
kept
gosh.
going. Fortunately, we didn't get pushed off the road or anything, and we were able to continue moving. But that just added misery to the misery on that deal.
My goodness. Jeez. That's it goes part of the reputation that a lot of stuff had in Russia at that time, and kind of always, not always has had, but often has had, with things breaking, people driving drunk. when I was in Afghanistan, there were a lot of helicopters that would take us around to the different FOBs and whatnot. And American soldiers would ride on these helicopters. And then there were some Russian helicopters that would transport some of the other people around that weren't soldiers. And it was old Mi 17 Russian surplus helicopters flown by Russian pilots, and there was all sorts of rumors about these guys flying drunk and stuff, and how Americans weren't allowed to ride in those helicopters. And so I don't know how much truth there was to it, but it seems like I never got the chance to ride in one, and I'm glad that I didn't. And so it sounds like you got the full meal deal to include. You got the bear, but you also got all these other crazy stories out of it too. Jeez.
They had a 3-man crew to run this helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
And the back end, it was a transport helicopter, I guess. So the back end had these great big doors that would fold down. You could have driven a Jeep in there and stuff. They were loading in all kinds of supplies to drop off at various villages along the way and stuff. I watched these guys flying it. And one guy, I mean, they had, this is old school stuff. There's no computers going on. This is old gray tube rays and stuff. And lights and switches all over. And one guy was kind of steering things or running out. I don't know what part. Another guy was merely throwing switches up and down constantly. I just closed my eyes and hoped the heck they maintained the flight. And they did a good job of it. We didn't have any issues there.
Yeah, the only thing that could have made that more adventuresome was there for to be a bucket catching like leaking hydraulic fluid or something within the helicopter. But I'm glad that you had a good hunt and that you got your bear, that you made it home safe from that deal. Golly, getting kidney stones on a hunt, that's icing on the cake.
It's a delight.
Now, this is not the only place that you have hunted the big bears in, though. Where'd you end up taking your other 2 bear that you took? Were they both in Alaska, right?
Yes. I actually hunted bears in Alaska at least 3 times now. Let me think. There might have been a 4th. But I remember going on a hunt years and years ago with Weatherby.
Okay.
Shooting a 375 Weatherby, not an H&H Magnum, but the 375 Weatherby. Mm-hmm. And then my buddy worked for Weatherby at the time, Brad Riddell. And Brad was a great guy. And I called him and I said, look, I'm going up on this moose hunt. No, bear hunt. He invited me on the bear hunt. That's right. The moose hunt was a different year. And he was using a 416, if I remember right. And he got out and talk about getting sick. This time it wasn't kidney stones. This time it was a migraine. Mm-hmm. Opening day. I mean, we're ready to go in the morning and I wake up and I've got this incredible migraine going on where I got the lights blinking and I can't see straight. Well, I'm not going to go take on a bear when I can't even see straight. And I know these headaches are going to go on all day. And if I try to move around and do anything, I'll start throwing up and I'll just be really miserable. So I thought I better just pass on today and I'll start up tomorrow. Well, wouldn't you know it? While he goes out the first day, he finds the bear up on the mountain. There's the big bear in the hole in the snow and the whole story. So he and his guide go up there and get nice and close. And his bear is kind of described it as being down in a tree well, where you got a spruce tree and the snow doesn't fall underneath those boughs. And it was kind of up under there. So they got a good look at it and they shot. Made a nice shot on it, and it comes out of the tree spinning like they do, and he shoots it again, and he shoots it again, and he shoots it again, and then the guide shoots it, and the guide shoots it, and I think they each shot it 4 times before they settled at hash. Whoofda! So, and then I went after a bear, and we found one similar deal in the snowed in and all, and glassed it from quite a distance and headed over that way. And I thought the guide was getting too close. He drove a snowmobile to cut the distance down, and then we're going to walk from there. And I was ready to go a mile or something and not just spook this bear, but he drove too close in my estimation. And I don't know if that was the cause or not, but I have to believe it was, because when we crawled over the ridge to get looking in for this closer shot, the bear was gone. Mm-hmm. Tracks in the snow, and we looked around, followed those tracks, and there, it's about 300 yards away, is the bear hustling off. So I think the sound of that snowmobile just told him to get out of Dodge. That was my failed hunt for a brown bear. Well, the next hunt was an interior grizzly hunt. I hunted with Lance Kronberger, great outfitter up there. And he had a place out in the rolly tundra hills to the east of Unalakleet. I think the locals call it Unalakleet. A little town on the coast there, kind of in the middle, on the west side. And we set up a nice tent camp up there, and the guide, I've forgotten his name now, nice, competent young man. And he just said, well, we might as well just sit here and glass because we can hike our butts off. and not come up with one of these bears because they're cruising for females.
Mm-hmm.
The snow was melting. It was patchy. Birds were coming back. We were hearing lots of shorebirds that nest up there. And there were some Jaeger flying around, which is not a bird that most people know, but there's several Jaegers were sort of like a gull tern sort of bird. They nest on the tundra and they're real aggressive, almost like a predatory bird, but not quite, but a peculiar thing. At any rate, they were buzzing around. So we had things to look at beside bears, and we'd see a bear way off in the distance, just cruising, and they just walk, walk, walk. When you see them, you know there's no sense in going after them. You're never going to catch up. So we just waited and waited, and one morning my guide saw a bear, and he said, let's go after that one. It looked not big, but boy, what a beautiful coat on it. He came back to camp and rattled my cage and said, let's go over this area. He was glassing from over there. So we packed up and went over and found these tracks. And he said, oh, this could be easy. We just follow the tracks and see where this bear went. Maybe it'll bed down. And if we get too tired, we can go back and see something on the way. So we followed that bear's trail. And I remember stopping and glassing and following the tracks. They showed up really well in the snow because of the shadow from the sun. And I followed those tracks, and he was glassing the further out country to see where it had gone, tried to catch a glimpse of it. And I just thought, kind of cool to see where this bear has gone. And I followed those tracks to a brown spot in the snow. There was the bear sleeping in the snow with just a few little alders sticking out of the snow. No cover recently at all, but it sunk low enough into the snow that it was sort of nondescript. But I saw the hair blowing in the wind. And I thought, God, that looks like the hair of a bear. So I got my guide and said, what do you think of this? And he said, oh, that must be the bear. Because the tracks lead right up to it. Duh.
And then there's no more coming out past it.
Yes, right. So it's like, well, shoot, it's in range. I don't know, 150 yards, 180, something like that. And I said, well, hey, this is a great opportunity. It's asleep, literally sleeping. Doesn't know we're here. Let me set up this tripod. And I had just gotten that in that day, kind of the latest, greatest camera, 8mm tiny film camera thing, I think it was. Be fun to get some video on this thing. I'll set it up, and then when it's ready to go, you push the button, and then I'll shoot the bear. I'll wake him up and shoot him. All right, so we got the camera all set up, and I showed him how to push the button to get it going and everything. Meanwhile, I had my rifle sitting on my right side in my shooting sticks. Well, when I did all that stuff for him and I turned to the rifle, I bumped it with my foot, knocked it over, and it goes clanky clunk, wakes the bear up. The bear sits up, and the Jaeger I was talking about buzzes him and pecks him in the head. And he jumps up looking at us, looking at the what's going on here. And it's like, that bear's about to split. We've got to do something quick. So it was a broadside shot. So I just put it on the shoulder, shot him in the heart, took off running. It felt like a good hit to me, but this bear was running like nothing had happened. So I swung with the bear and thought, well, since it's already wounded, I might as well try a high shoulder shot, see if I can't do it. But golly, if I didn't do it, I dropped a running bear with a high shoulder shot. Imagine that. And that was really impressive. It was just, that bear was flat on the snow, slid down the hill into the bottom and stopped.
Wow.
And we walked over there, and where the first shot was, I saw this line in the snow. It was obviously the bullet exiting the bear. I was shooting a custom-built Timberline rifle from Jim Borden, a heck of a competition shooter, a real accuracy nut, but he built beautiful hunting rifles. And he built that one for me just for this hunt. And he chambered it for the 300 Caribou, which was a sort of an Ackley improved version of the 300 Win Mag. And I was shooting 180 grain MRX bullets. That was an all copper bullet from Barnes, except for they put tungsten in the shank of that bullet. So you've got your classic hollow nose on a copper bullet, but you increase the weight of the bullet significantly by putting that real heavy tungsten in the shank. And that increases your ballistics coefficient by a huge margin. So I had a really effective, deeply penetrating bullet right there. And it sailed right through that bear on that heart shot, which ended up being the heart, and it was hit. So it was in the snow and tracing this line, and I dug around for a while trying to find it and couldn't. So then we went over to the dead bear, and there was my second shot, another line in the snow. This time I dug and I found the bullet.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was perfectly mushroomed. This looked like a classic advertisement for a Barnes bullet. I threw it in my pocket, of course, took it home and weighed it. It was a 180 grain bullet when I shot it, and it was a 180 grain bullet when I weighed it after recovery.
Man,
So that was pretty impressive stuff. So
that is pretty cool. Jeez.
Yeah. Now, that was not a huge grizzly bear,
Mhm.
but it was the most perfect coat I've ever seen on a bear. Just no flaws anywhere, no rubbing of any kind, just a rich, lush blonde, just a gorgeous bear.
And how did it compare size-wise to your Kamchatka brown bear?
Oh, gosh, it was at least foot smaller. Don't remember the dimension on him. I've got the hide over there, but it's not a very big bear. It was a female, and my guide knew it at the time. He said, Ron, this is not a big bear. I watched her walking, and it's probably a female. To me, it looks like one, and he knew more about grizzly bears than I did. And he said, I would kind of recommend you take this bear because we're not seeing that many. How many days have we been out here? We've only seen that one big boar crossing the country way out there. But if you're not real crazy about getting a Boone and Crockett head and all that kind of stuff, if you just want a beautiful pelt, this is about the prettiest one I've ever seen. She's just a gorgeous blonde with some brown legs. And when I saw her, I thought, yeah, this is a specimen, and I really don't care if the head's going to make the book or not.
Very interesting. Well, tell us about your other grizzly bear.
Well,
the most recent one.
That was just within the last 3 weeks. And surprisingly, this one actually is a Boone and Crockett.
Oh.
Well, I wasn't going out thinking I want to shoot a Boone and Crockett bear. I just wanted to have a good hunt as usual and report on it, do a video, do a story. Got to write a story for Sports Field magazine on this one. So, and I wanted to test a rifle. And I wanted to do something a little bit different with the rifle. I could have taken my 375 H&H, but I've already used that on a bear. Used a 300 mag. I'm going to try something different. So I was thinking of a short action with a short 20-inch barrel and a suppressor. So I wouldn't have to worry about muzzle blast. And then if we got into the tight stuff, it would be a little bit handier. And I could shoot without fear of the muzzle blast ruining some more of my hearing, which don't have much left anyway.
Yeah.
I can't afford to spend any more of it. But I couldn't get the job done. I called Park West and saw if they had something in a 358 Winchester. That's your 308 necked up to 35. And I thought, man, with a 225-ish grain bullet, man, that ought to be pretty hard hitting on a bear. We're going to be shooting inside at 200 yards, closer to 100 if we can get it. That's the goal anyhow. They're not going to let you shoot 300-yard shots on bears generally. So I thought that would work out great. Well, they didn't have a barrel in 35. And Ward said, he's the shop manager. He said, hey, Ron, I got a 338 barrel here. You want to do something on that? And I said, well, what kind of actions do you have? 338 Win Mag, and that's kind of a standard up there anymore for bears, as effective as a 375, but I'd really like to stick with something short and light. How about a 338 Federal? Nobody hears about that anymore. It's a great little round. There's your 308 necked up to 33. It puts out more energy than the 30-06. Shoots a little flatter than the 7-rim mag with some bullets. It's just kind of crazy what it'll all do. But I thought, yeah, that'd work on a bear, especially if we used another all-copper bullet like a Hammer or a Barnes. And Ward said, well, I happen to have a box of some 210 grain TSX bullets that I could load it up for you, because time was of the essence. We only had a few weeks to get this whole project done. So I said, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. Well, he couldn't. I can't remember why. The barrel wasn't thick enough to work with the suppressor he had. So he couldn't put the suppressor on. And I said, well, then you might as well leave the barrel 24 inches so we can get some velocity out of this thing.
Yeah.
I'm willing to sacrifice velocity to save my hearing, but not if I don't have to. So it comes out. Well, heck, I've got the rifle right here if you want to see it. And it's just kind of a classic Model 97 from Park West Arms. And there's your full-length orange barrel. And it's got a classic stock, which I like, synthetic. It's a Macmillan stock. And it's, of course, short action. And it's 338 Federal. So it was going, I chronographed it. When Ward sent it, he said, Ron, I didn't have a chronograph, but I got a droop in MOA or slightly under. Good enough for you? And I said, yeah, don't worry about that. I'm going to be close to this bear. And I'll see what it's doing when it gets here. The rifle arrived like a day or two before, and I went out and shot it and found out that it was doing 2,490 feet per second with a 210 grain bullet. So that's giving me around 22 to 2,250 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. Hangs on to 2,000 out to 200 yards. Mm-hmm. Sounds pretty good. It's more about the bullet and where you place it than horsepower. I know that. And I thought that should work just fine. So that's what I went up with. And it's a nice light trim rifle. It's not a featherweight by any means, but it comes in at around 7 pounds and 5 ounces or so. And that's with the Leupold scope on it. The scope is really too big. I wish they'd have put a smaller scope on, but it's what he had. And I would like a 2.5 to 8 by 36 VX3. And this is the 4.5 to 14, is it? Yeah, to 14, which is more power than is needed on this particular rifle. So would have been better off if I had the time and were building this thing to perfection. That's what I'd have gone with. But boy, it sure worked out. I was really impressed. I've used that 338 Federal on elk before and had a nice one-shot kill on a raghorn bull elk in Montana. And then a friend of mine used it on a moose one time, and it was dramatic. One shot down goes the moose. So I thought, I know this thing's going to work on a bear, but most people would think, I don't know about that. Mm-hmm. But also, Phil Shoemaker, the master guide up in Alaska, has done a lot of bear hunting. He kind of made his career on bears. He has told me that he gets just as good a performance out of a 30-06 on those big peninsula brown bears as he does out of 375s and 338s. He says, really, it's just the right bullet in the right place. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have a guy who can shoot a 30-06 accurately than somebody with a big boomer who can't.
Yeah.
And then knowing that 210 grain bullet out of a 338 is producing more energy than the 30-06, I thought, got to be working.
Yeah.
That's what I took up there. And it obviously I'm still alive, so it seems to have worked.
And not only worked, but it got you on a Boone and Crockett bear. So tell us how that all went down.
Yeah, that's just mostly, I think that's luck. We had great outfitters. It was Bushwhack Alaska Adventures, and they were running Telerik Creek Lodge, which has been a fishing and hunting lodge up there in Iliamna for a long, long time. I think it's in its third ownership or something. A nice young man and his family are managing it now and doing a great job. They had a crew of young guides in their 20s who were just some of the nicest, most competent young guys that Betsy and I ever worked with. My wife went along because she got to stay in the lodge and go fishing while I was out in the boonies swatting mosquitoes and bears. Mm-hmm. And she just enjoyed the heck out of these young guys. A couple of young gals in the kitchen, and there were no battles over who gets to date the kitchen crew because that was verboten. It was just going on. These people were serious about their jobs, and they did a wonderful job. And then when I flew up, it was another special treat. He said, I'm going to have Jerry fly you up. So we go down to the boat dock right there, and the plane is a Beaver, which is always fun. It's a classic, de Havilland Beaver to fly in there with floats. Mm-hmm. And here's your pilot, Jerry Jakes. Jerry, how you been, buddy? I hunted the Brooks Range for bears with Jerry back 20 years ago, I suppose, with Kimber. And it was like old home week. Hey, how you been? And all that stuff. So I got to visit with Jerry for quite a bit. And then he flew us about, I think we went an hour, perhaps an hour and a half north of Iliamna into the upper reaches of the Kamchatka River drainage. That is an area famous for its moose and caribou herd. Back in the 90s, I think it was, maybe the 80s, probably the 90s. Yeah, it was the 90s. The Kamchatka caribou herd was famous for numbers. They had like 300 to as many as 400,000 caribou. And everyone was going up there and getting their caribou meat and big racks and everything. And then the herd started to crash, and they had wolf issues and they had bear issues. And so they started doing a lot of collared bears and research and things. And they found out that some of these old boar grizzlies had figured out how to kill moose really effectively. And one of them had taken down 20 moose calves in one spring. Ooh. And if you know anything about the density of moose in that vast country, that's taken out way too many moose calves. So the upshot was that moose population was getting no recruitment. It wasn't like 10% recruitment or even 5%. It was nothing. So they figured they've got to do something about these bears. They had just gotten too many old boars that had figured out the ultimate hunting techniques for these moose. And another guide up there a few years before had told me that he followed a big old boar around in the springtime while he was flying, and he would see this boar on a moose kill and go, oh my gosh, that boar killed a big old moose.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next 3 days later, he'd find him on another one. And he ended up with something like 12 adult moose killed in that springtime. So obviously they're doing some significant damage. Exactly why the bears are able to survive so well, I don't know. But the upshot was Fish and Game decided they needed to reduce this population, so they extended the season. So what I hunted was considered the conservation season and extended 2 weeks beyond the normal season. And that was June, pretty late in June. And I think I was on the last hunt before the season closed. And on the prior hunt, their client was out with them battling 50-mile-an-hour winds, which is a real common problem up in Alaska on some of these spring bear hunts. They just get huge winds and it's miserable. You're essentially confined to the tent. You might get out and glass for a little bit, but you can imagine how miserable it would be in winds that speed. Fortunately, when I got there, the storm had just ended and we got beautiful weather. It was like a gift from heaven, except for the mosquitoes. So Jerry flies us up, and then we just didn't really know where we were going to land. They were just somewhere up there. We're going to look for some good habitat where we think we're going to find a bear. And they had picked a few lakes out that he thought he could land on. So we flew up to this lake and looked at it. And this doesn't quite look like the right habitat for bears. Too open. We need maybe a little bit more forest close by. Let's try somewhere else. So they tried another lake they had looked at, a couple more like that. So it was just a little bit of area scouting from the plane before we picked the lake that had a nice mix of forested hillside with spruce and birch, and another one that was tundra on the other side, and then a couple of ponds and a creek, and it just looked like a good area for bears and moose. So we landed there, and it turned out to be a really shallow lake, and we had to wade everything ashore through the muck. If you've ever been duck hunting with your waders on, going through muck that's up to your shins, that's the kind of muck we were wading through to get off that airplane to shore. So we piled all our gear up and climbed up onto the hills, went about a half mile, packed everything up, and made a nice camp on an open bench, a tundra bench, so we could glass the entire lake shores, seeing 2 lakes and a little muskeg between the two, and then several ridges of tundra where the bears are going to be walking. And my guide, his name was Gary Stewart, no relation to Jimmy Stewart, my favorite old actor, but equally nice guy, 15 years or so of experience up there. And he said, Ron, from this vantage point, we can do most of our hunting right from camp. It's going to be cruising bears are going to be looking for females and elk or moose calves to kill. And so I think we can just watch, and we might move a little bit down the ridge to get a new look into some new areas over there. But that's pretty much all we're going to have to do. We can walk if you want to, but it's not going to really do us much good. So we sat around camp, put the camp up and glassed, and then fixed dinner and glassed while we were eating, and then headed off and glassed a little more from a different vantage point. The next day we headed out. I don't think we went 400 yards from camp, and we had a beautiful open ridge from which we could see all of the maximum area, and we glassed and glassed all day. And late in the afternoon, spotted one bear. We had a Packer film guy along with us, and he was doing a great job helping out and glassing as well. And he said, hey, I see one. And it was 2 miles away, walking under a ridge right out in the open. And instantly we knew it was like every other spring brown bear I've seen, just walking, covering ground, big old boar. And while there's no sense in trying to chase him, by the time we get off this one little knoll, he'll be into the forest over there. We'll just have to hope maybe we can get over there tomorrow and watch that. Maybe that's his regular travel route or something. So the next morning we got up intending to do that, had breakfast, and we were just strapping on our packs. I was literally closing the strap on my pack and picked up my rifle to hear Gary say, there's our bear. And I thought he was poking me, And I turned around what? No, there's our bear. And he points, and big old bear on the other side of the pond where we've been expecting him. Holy mackerel, it was just like, is this real? Because we've been dreaming about this. We've been talking about there should be a bear over there. And there he was. And then it was a matter of cutting him off at right angles. The bear was going west. We just had to go north. and we had to run across a muskeg between these two ponds, and it was pretty soggy stuff, lots of mosses and lichens in there. But that bear didn't pay any attention to us. They just don't seem to pay attention to visuals. The scent, you're done for, but the wind was in our favor. So we just went running across there. We bailed off that tundra ridge, went down through the spruce trees and the birch trees, got onto that wide open muskeg, and then went sloshing across. Our boots were sinking in about 8 inches to a foot, and closed. And we could see that the bear was going to reach the timber about 200 yards from where we were going to get if we didn't hustle. So we pushed it as best we could. And then it looked like he was easily in range, and we were going to have maybe 40 yards remaining open to shoot. So I got down into my sticks, my portable sticks, and said to Gary, range that bugger for me. He said, 189 yards. I said, stop him. He whistled. The bear stopped. I got on him. The bear started walking again. He whistled. The bear stopped. I got on him. He started walking again. I thought about taking another moving shot like I did in Kamchatka. I said, I better not push my luck. So I said, whistle louder or something like that. So he really blew a whistle, and now the bear stopped and focused on us and really looked hard. And I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and I put it on his front shoulder. Took that safe shoulder shot. I thought about going for the spine shot, but if you shoot too high and you could just wound him kind of thing, better to get one into the boiler. So I broke his shoulder. That 210 grain Marnes bullet just hammered his shoulder. Spun around in circles like they always do. And then I wanted to put another shot into him while he was spinning. This is often a challenge. And he had gotten so low down in that wet muskeg that I probably only had a foot left of bear to shoot. Instead of aiming to slide across the top of the grasses to get just there, I went for the middle of what I had available to me and ended up shooting high. And then the bear ran straight away for the trees, but he had a spruce tree between me and him. I had racked in my third shot, ready to take it, waiting for him to clear that darn tree, and he wasn't clearing it. And Gary and I had already discussed this. He said, Ron, do you want me to help out if it looks like that bear might get into thick, nasty cover? We're going to have to wade in there and sort him out, kind of a thing, because that can get kind of hairy. And I said, yeah, I'm not really all that interested in proving my manhood here by hand-to-hand combat with a bear. So you are more than welcome to join in and try to anchor that bear. So that's what he did when he realized that that tree was in my way. He was off to my right enough to clear that. And he put one into the back end of that bear and broke its hip, upper leg, it looked like. And that rolled him up and he couldn't go anywhere. Then I put another shot in. And then that was it. I mean, 3 shots hit him.
Very good, man. Tell me again what the range was on that bear.
189. Yeah.
And so a lot of stuff in that 100 to 200 range, seems like. First one was a little bit, you said about 80 yards in Russia?
Yeah, I would have guessed that at 80, 85 yards. Might have been as far as 100, but I don't think so. I'm remembering 80, 85.
And you shot this bear with a Park West Arms Model 97? Yeah, 338 Federal. Yeah. And that was the same type of rifle you shot your Kamchatka bear.
I just realized that.
Yeah.
I just realized that I used a 97 on both of those. I'll be darned.
So it makes a full circle, right? Back when it was Dakota Arms, part of Remington, and Linda Powell worked there, and they loaded Swift ammo, and now all those things are different about it, and they're on their own. Man, that is very interesting. So that's the was the Russia bear? Was that your first brown bear or your big bear like that?
Yeah, it was definitely my first brown bear. I had hunted that brown bear with the Weatherby earlier, but didn't get a shot. So yeah, this was my first brown bear, and then the Unaclete interior grizzly was my first grizzly.
Which one of them was first chronologically?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly don't know the answer. I'm thinking it was the Alaska grizzly.
Now, you told a couple of stories, like say this bear that you had to shoot a couple times, and you shot it and it spun around, and then there was your buddy that made the shot on the bear. They had to shoot it 8 times. But this it seems like it happens sometimes, but not others. In your experience and talking to other people, how tough are these bears to kill, really?
You read a lot about multiple shots with big bores. And
Mhm.
guys say, well, boy, you've got to use a big 416 or a 450 or a 470 Nitro Express and all these kinds of things. But at the same time, you hear these guys using those and they shoot him once, 4 times, 6 times.
Mhm.
There was a famous story about a handgunner, and I always forget his name, but was it Jones? I don't know, somebody who liked to hunt with a 44 mag, and he wanted to do a brown bear with it. If I got my story right, he does very well. They find a bear, he shoots one time and kills it. He
Mhm.
must have spined it, I assume.
Mhm.
But he's pretty cocky then, and he tells this story. I read it on his website or something. And now they're sitting in their little cabin on the beach awaiting their trip home. And the door's open. It's a nice day. And hey, there's a bear coming. Is walking down the beach. And this bear sees them and decides it's time to charge. And he
Mhm.
comes charging right toward the cabin. And they kind of, what the heck's that crazy bear doing? He's coming up here. This is a charge.
Mhm. Uh-huh.
He's coming in the door. And he empties his gun on this dang bear. And the guide's pouring rounds into him. And it's not a one-shot kill anymore.
Mhm.
So it just goes to show that you cannot depend on any particular bullet or gun to kill a bear with one shot unless you hit him in the spinal column or the brain, which is pretty much the same thing. And I think that's what's going on when people think you need a bigger bullet that hits harder. No, you've got to take into account the size of this animal and how long it takes any animal to die once you unhook his plumbing,
Yeah.
whether you're taking the air out of his lungs or the blood out of his system. It has to have time to hit the brain so then that bear realizes it's no longer quite capable of doing what it was doing.
Mhm.
And I see similar things with big animals like moose and eland. You make a perfect shot and it acts like it hasn't even been hit. But then after a while, it starts to get woozy because its blood pressure is dropping and its brain is it's essentially fainting. And then when the brain cells die after they no longer have freshly oxygenated blood, that's what ends up with the actual this animal is now dead.
Mhm.
And I don't know that I've done some research and they say that it takes 10 minutes for brain cells to die. The animal's unconscious in a few seconds to maybe as many as 10, depending on how quickly it runs out of that blood pressure and or oxygenation for its brain cells. But it's the oxygen going to the brain cells that keep everything clicking. So with a big bear, it just seems like they can absorb those big bullets and they've got enough, I don't know, blood, lung capacity, or what it is that keeps them going.
If they're on their feet for 1 minute after the shot, they can go a long way and get into some thick, nasty stuff, or
Yeah,
they can turn and make a mess out of whoever's made them mad.
yeah, yeah. And there are plenty of stories about that. And I've read a lot of them. I've read a lot of the books about grizzly attacks and guys shooting them multiple times and they can't stop them. And you always think, well, I'm going to get a bigger hammer. By golly, I'll stop him. I think you would need a Mack truck or a Caterpillar to stop him with blunt force trauma.
Mhm.
It just doesn't happen on a shoulder shot. I mean, I broke that front shoulder to where it was just a limp rag and the bullet was lodged underneath the hide on the opposite shoulder, just in the pocket behind that
Mhm.
shoulder. So you know darn well it went right through the middle where it was supposed to. And based on the elevation and all, I would guess it took out the top of the heart and the aorta and through the lungs, the usual what you want. But again, that bear took off running for the forest. It was looking for cover after it figured out something was not right here. You know, that second shot kind of alerted it to there's something going on here besides being stuck in the side by an antler or something.
Now, you hunted all three of your bears that we talked about in the spring. And so on two of them, you had lots and lots of snow. Or one of them, you had a lot of snow. One of them, you had a lot of snow. And then this most recent one, it seemed like it was later, more muddy, mosquitoes,
Yeah,
different type of challenges.
yeah, it was full on springtime bordering summer.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of mosquitoes around. A few White Sox flies are starting to come out. The vegetation was growing, flowers were up, and everything. But again, it was an unusual extended conservation hunt to try to take out these old boars.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We were looking for an old boar. Didn't expect to find one that was Boone and Crockett size,
Mm-hmm.
great big pumpkin head on that thing. But that's the kind of boar that is killing all those moose calves. So that's exactly, I mean, I felt pretty good about it as far as this is a conservation hunt fishing game. Once this kind of a bear taken out,
Yeah.
golly, we did it. I'd have to imagine that old boar had pretty much figured out how to make a good living eating on moose up in that country.
Now, I have eaten black bear and tasted fantastic. Did you eat any of these bears? And if so, how'd they taste?
That is the sore spot on this hunt. I fully intended to do that. And we took a loin off that bear. Gary said, oh, yeah, they're good. Depending on what the bear ate. The bear in Kamchatka that I shot, I was going to eat some of that. And the stink of rotting salmon was so bad, I couldn't even begin to put it in a pan. It just, and I thought about it. Okay, well, these bears are eating salmon all fall, piling on the weight, and then they sleep and they absorb all what they've eaten. And they're living off it. They're metabolizing fish. So their whole system is dead fish. So I thought, well, on an interior bear that's not eating salmon, it should be okay. He probably fed on berries all fall, some ground squirrels. Now he's eating moose. Well, moose meat tastes pretty good to me. If that transfers to the bear, it should taste like a moose, right?
Right, yeah.
So I was all ready to eat this one, and Gary and I took a loin off of it. We're going to go up to camp and fix it. And he said, this freshly shot is going to be pretty tough. It really doesn't do it justice. I know our chef back at camp has made some great grizzly in the past. Let's just take it back to camp. We'll get picked up tomorrow. We'll set this in the shade. It'll cool adequately. And then we can let it age for a few days, and he'll cook it up, and it'll really be good. I want you to really get the best of the flavor. Well, that sounded good to me, so that's what we did. Well, then when we got back to camp, kind of forgot about it. Went in the refrigerator to age. We went fishing and came back, and I said, oh, hey, that bear, can we eat that tonight? Oh, I'm sorry. He's already prepared whatever fancy meal he prepared for the night. So then the next day he was going to have it for hors d'oeuvres. Came in after fishing, and he, for some reason, hadn't made it again. And this went on day after day until it was too late. And we never did get to eat the darn stuff. And I'm kicking myself for not grabbing it right away and just doing it myself. But once we got back to the lodge, there's other folks there, and it's a fancy kitchen, and you don't want to be barging in on it and saying, give me a pan, I'm going to fry up this bear. So I kind of missed the boat on that one, and it really upsets me. I wanted to be able to speak with authority on this and say, I've tried bear, I've tried black bear, I've tried grizzly bear. I can't recommend brown bear that ate salmon. I've tried stuff like that. I've eaten raccoon and porcupine and all sorts of odd things because too many people have misconceptions about wild meat. You read some of the old timers, and they absolutely loved bear. Back in Daniel Boone's day and Davy Crockett, my God, made a living on bears, shooting bears for the market. And they loved bear grease for all of their cooking and making their donuts and different things. And then a lot of people who think raccoon is really good, and when I've eaten it, I found it to be really good. So I just like to encourage folks to try all these meats. There are lots of poisonous plants that'll kill you if you eat it, but I haven't heard of any poisonous meats except for the liver of a polar bear.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very interesting. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation talking to you about these different experiences and everything that goes into it. So as we wrap up the discussion on brown/grizzly bear, I'm going to ask you the question I'm asking all of my guests on the show this year. You must choose one to hunt with for the rest of your life, either a single cartridge, and you can use any bullet with that cartridge, or you can choose a single bullet type, and you can use that bullet in any cartridge that you're going to hunt with. So what is your choice? Is it a bullet or is it a cartridge? And then which specific one are you choosing?
Boy, yeah, I'm going to have to go for the bullet that I can use in multiple cartridges. I would hate to think that I had to use the same cartridge over and over again. Yeah, I would go with the bullet because the diversity of what you could do with that. Wow. Yeah, and I would probably pick the hammer bullets. I've just been I just love those things. They just have worked well on animals from as small as 20-pound little antelopes in Africa, like a steenbuck or a little bush buck. They might be about 80 pounds up to Cape buffalo. And I've used them in 25-06 up to 375 H&H. And those bullets just perform. And they go faster than any other bullet for the same load. If I've got the same basic powder load, you work your way up in your pressure signs and all that stuff. It just seems like every time I load a hammer bullet, I can get another 100 feet per second without showing pressure signs. It just seems like it's a faster bullet. And I think it's because they're sort of a bore rider design. Got their relief grooves, and they're double radiused rather than being a vertical 90-degree groove. It's double radiused, and there's just a little thin slice on the top of it that actually rides on the bore.
So I'm looking at their website right now, and I know they make several different types of hunting bullets, but they list stuff between 17 caliber and 510. No, 585 caliber on their website, but lots of stuff in between. Yeah. So fair enough. That is a good way of looking at it, and there's lots of nice things to say about copper bullets in general. I've never hunted with the hammer bullets myself, but I've never met anyone that had anything other than nice things to say about it.
Well, good. That confirms what I've discovered.
Well, where can people go to learn more about you and your YouTube channel and your podcast and all that stuff, Ron?
Oh, sure. RonSpomerOutdoors.com. That's our website, and you can get to anywhere from there, but you can just type in Ron Spomer Outdoors on YouTube. We have a regular channel where we review products and stuff and do a lot of shooting and things, but we also have a podcast called Ron Spomer Outdoors Podcast. Duh. Mm-hmm. And I write occasionally for Sporting Classics and Sports Field magazines and a few others from time to time. But we're so busy with all the video and podcast work now that that's kind of taken up most of our time.
Okay, well, very good. I'm subscribed to your YouTube channel and listen to your podcast, all that. People that are listening to this should, if they are not already doing so. So, Ron, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I really enjoyed talking to you about hunting brown and grizzly bear.
Well, John, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. You do a great show. You're a good service for all hunters who need good information, and you present it in a great fashion. So you call me anytime. I'm always happy to visit with you.
Sounds good, Ron. Thanks. Now, as you can probably tell, Ron has had some serious adventures hunting brown and grizzly bear over the years. Those creatures are some of those really cool animals that a lot of people dream about hunting. So check out my interview with Phil Shoemaker in episode 320 to learn more about hunting the big bears in Alaska. Also, be sure to check out RonSpomerOutdoors.com, Ron's YouTube channel, and Ron's podcast. He has a lot of great content at all three places, and there are links to each one in the episode description. The fact that you are listening to this podcast means that you are serious about making your hunting dreams come true. The next thing you can do to make those hunting dreams come true is to hit that subscribe button on whatever podcasting service you are listening to ensure you don't miss out on my future episodes. And go to biggamehuntingpodcast.com/ebook, sign up there to get my free ebook and to join my mailing list at the same time. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.